All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and welcome to the Veninga Theater at the UW Center for Civic Engagement. And we're going to talk about mayor versus administrator, who should run City Hall. Wausau residents will be voting on this in a referendum question in April. And you know what? It's good to kind of know what you're voting on. So we sure appreciate your joining us, and we look forward to hearing your questions. We want to thank I'm Rob Mentzer with the Wausau Daily Herald, I should say, and we want to thank our panelists for being here. We'll let them introduce themselves, but also our sponsors tonight, our Daily Herald Media, my employer, the Wisconsin Public Radio, the Wausau Region Chamber of Commerce, and the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service. Thanks for having us. So we want to ask, listen, I don't need to ask, you guys are respectful, you're grown-ups, but please be respectful, and there will be a question and answer session, so no need to shout out. We'll have roving microphones, and we'll try to get to folks' questions. Silence your cell phones if you have cell phones. I mean, you do. So put them on silent right now if you've forgotten. And we look forward to this. This should be fun. Panelists, let's quickly have you each introduce yourselves, and then we'll have opening statements. We have a couple of short presentations from two of our panelists. We'll have short opening statements, and then we'll have opportunity for some exchanges. So Keene, why don't you just do introductions? And you have to press your button in the front, push, and when the light is on, that's when your mic is on.
All right, thank you. I'm Keene Winters. I'm the alderman for District 6.
I'm Linda Lawrence. I'm a former mayor of Wausau and a current retiree and full-time grandmother. Exhausted.
My name is Ken Day, and I am on the Maryland County Board from District 7 here in Wausau.
My name is John Robinson. I'm a former mayor of Wausau and currently serve on the Marathon County Board while trying to work for the Department of Natural Resources.
My name is Steve Hintz. I'm affiliated with an organization called Public Administration Associates, and I have been working with the governance committee of the Wausau Region Chamber of Commerce in providing information to the public and taking public input with regard to the advisory referendum. For many years, I was a professor of public administration at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Keene Winters, let's start with you.
Light. All right, thank you. It's a green light appropriately for tonight. Since it's St. Patrick's Day, thank you all for giving up maybe some of your holiday to be with us tonight. I'm going to promise to be as brief as possible, but I do have a lot of material to go through to help set the stage and make sure that we're making an informed decision. So the story is really simple. After 143 years as a city, Wausau really finds itself in the same place as many other older American cities. It has aging infrastructure, it has older and less desirable housing stock, and it's surrounded by suburbs that can offer all the same amenities as the town, but for lower tax rates. And that creates a mismatch. It makes it hard for us to recruit new residents, recruit new businesses. The suburbs are skimming those off. And when you're in a competitive position or a negative competitive position, you really need to bring in the most talented management team that you can to turn things around. And that's why we're talking about bringing in an administrator. That leads us really to two premises. The first one is that we have a resource crisis or crisis in competitiveness with those around us. The growing suburbs are taking wealth away from us. In relative terms, the city is shrinking as the world around it grows. In the 2010 census, which I think was a watershed for us, we became only 29% of Marathon County, or the Wausau MSA, and we became only 49% of the 7 communities that make up central Marathon County. And so for the first time in our history, we are now a minority instead of a majority outright onto ourselves. in the central part of Marathon County. So when you have that kind of a competitiveness problem, and we'll come back to this premise in a little bit because some of you, may be wondering whether it's true or not. We're going to go through some of the numbers. But following from the first premise is really the second premise, and that is if you do have a crisis in which you need to be more competitive, you need top leadership. And the human resource strategy for getting the top leadership is always the same. There are just three things you need to do. You need to expand the recruitment pool, you need to set minimum qualifications and experience requirements, and you need to increase the compensation. And at least two of those we can't do with an electoral system. We can't expand the recruitment pool beyond our boundaries, and we can't set minimum qualifications other than the fact that you have to be 18 years old or not be a felon. And that's it. That's all you need to do to be mayor. Let's talk about that first premise. And a while back in August, there was an op-ed written by a young man who was about to graduate from college. He was doing a senior research project, and he chose to do it on the Wausau MSA. His name was Brad Stieber. So here's what he found out in looking into the Wausau Metropolitan Statistical Area. And a metropolitan statistical area is a geographic area that has at least 125,000 people and is federally designated. Our overall rank out of 379 MSAs was 332nd. For our 5-year growth, we ranked 373rd, 6th from the bottom. We also had lower level rankings than virtually every other MSA in Wisconsin, except Sheboygan beat us once in the 5-year rankings. Otherwise, we were the absolute bottom. And he gives a number of statistics in his op-ed, but then I'll conclude with what he said. After reading and doing research on Wausau, it's difficult to be an econo-optimist with respect to Wausau's indicators. It is hard for me to see it as an attractive place to move after I graduate. Across the board, we observe cellar-level economic ranks, especially those that could be considered leading economic indicators. Employment continues to grow more slowly, and the composition of the labor force does not indicate a large portion of young, high-skilled workers. These characteristics may have a multiplicative effect regarding the dearth of high-skilled workers and the exodus of upscale retailers. It seems as though Wausau's economy may be falling further behind within Wisconsin and within the Midwest. And so that's not the kind of conclusion I want to hear from a highly educated millennial about coming to this community. That's a real concern. Now, you have to ask, we were talking about the Wausau MSA, which is all of Marathon County. What you need to know is it really is the city that's weighing this down. So if you look at the past 3 years of unemployment statistics, you can see a column for the city and you can see a column for Marathon County or the MSA. Unemployment in Wausau is typically 33% higher than in the rest of the county. Now, remember, the county includes us, so we're actually weighing down their numbers some. So the difference between being in Wausau and stepping across the boundary is almost a 40% difference in unemployment, and that's 2 or 3 points at any given time. That's a pretty big difference. There's also a column at the end called rank. In Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development keeps unemployment statistics on the 32 largest cities, of which we are one. We have tended to rank 4th through 7th in highest unemployment among cities in Wisconsin. So that's pretty high. That means we're keeping company with places like Milwaukee, Racine, Beloit, Mount Pleasant, which is a suburb of Racine, Kenosha, Green Bay, and West Bend, some of the most troubled communities in Wisconsin. Janesville generally has better unemployment than Wausau, despite the loss of their GM plant. We have some of the highest unemployment in the state. We're not growing. If you look at just a swath of cities across the middle part of Wisconsin here, you can see their growth over a 20-year period. can see Stevens Point at the top, Green Bay near the bottom, but at the very bottom, Wausau growing 5.5% in 20 years. So there's been virtually no growth since John was mayor. And at 5.5% growth over 20 years, we're talking about 0.25% a year. That's very small growth. How does that compare to the world around us? Well, all 7 cities average about twice the growth we had. And so cities have a struggle growing. But Wisconsin grew 3 times we had what we did. And the United States during that same period grew 5 times as fast. And you all understand that if you're getting state aids and you're getting federal aids and you are not growing and keeping up with the population of those around you, just like a school district with declining enrollment, your share of that piece of pie is going down. Does growth matter? Absolutely. Well, first let me say that there is growth happening in the center part of Marathon County. It's really just going to 3 communities, Rothschilds, Weston, and Cronenwetter, and Wausau, Mosinee, and Schofield are kind of getting skunked on that growth. Does growth matter? Well, the truth is, by and large, the people who move are the people who have the money to move. And so you're going to see a strong correlation between wealth and income and growth. And so now you can see this, that for the 2 high growth communities, if you live in Weston or Cronenwetter, on average you now make 25% more than someone living in Wausau. And if you live in Mosinee or Rothschilds, on average you make 10% more than someone living in Wausau. And we in Wausau are making a lot less than the state average. So the simple fact is, the suburbs are richer. They're bigger and they're richer. So just to summarize all that, low MSA rankings, bottom 15%, high unemployment, top 20 to 25% in Wisconsin, incomes 13% below the state average, very slow net population growth, and migration to the suburbs. Now the question is, do you buy into premise 1, that we really have some disturbing trends on our hands that we really need to address? Now here's where I lose the crowd a little bit, and that's, stop, you're breaking my heart. Why, Keene, why do you have to constantly criticize Wausau? I love Wausau, I live here. The problem is I'm 52. The problem is I can't get someone who's 24 to stay here. We are a net exporter of our best and brightest, and that's not going to work in the long run. And secondly, I would take issue with the issue of criticism, in that really an honest and factual discussion of real economic trends shouldn't be considered criticism. It should be considered realism, and we ought to be smart enough to look at those trends and deal with them. So what's the current system look like? Well, right now, we have a mayor only. And that mayor is supposed to be a combination politician, chief executive officer, chairman of the board, run a 325-person corporation, supervise department heads who all make a lot more, almost 30% more than the mayor. So you're really asking for Superman or Superwoman for $75,000 a year. And I have to ask you, what are the odds that you're really going to get someone who takes on all of these roles together, or do we have to divide it up? So here's the proposal in a nutshell. Hire a full-time administrator to be the chief operating officer. Have them be responsible for managing operations, supervising, mentoring, and coaching the senior managers, which would be our department heads. Look for a salary in the $127,000 range and have an at-will contract, so this person can be terminated any time by the council if they do not perform their duties. You don't have to wait 4 years. The second part is that we would reduce the mayor to 0.2 or 0.3%, 0.2 or a third time, so it'd be maybe 2 or 3 times the amount of time that an alderman puts in. They would still chair meetings, they'd have a veto, they'd recommend political appointments, and they'd represent the city at ceremonial functions, and we have them in at a pay roughly 3 times what an alderman is getting right now. We're not the first ones to have this debate. In fact, this debate about cities getting more complicated and needing skilled professionals to run has been really raging throughout Wisconsin for the last 20 years. If I go back to 1990, there were 188 cities, and at that time, still 2/3 of them, a full 66%, had mayors only. Come forward 22 years to 2012, you can see that a majority of cities now have administrators or managers, and mayor-only cities are now the minority. Everyone's coming to the same conclusion. We need to separate politics from management, and we need to hire the best qualified managers that we can. To summarize, the Wausau MSA ranks 332nd out of 379. We have some of the highest unemployment, zero population growth. On average, people who live in Wausau have lower incomes now, and people are voting with their feet. We really need to turn this around. And that gets us back to the initial premise. The city of Wausau now faces some of the most difficult circumstances a modern city can face, like a Detroit, like a Cincinnati, like a Chicago. You have growing suburbs around you that are sucking off resources. And when you're a corporation and you need to be competitive, you need the best leadership team that you can find. What's the action plan? It's relatively simple. Invest $70,000 more per year in a quarter FTE in improving the city management team. Pay a competitive salary for the administrator, recruit an administrator through a national search and resume screening, impose minimum qualifications for both education and work experience, and have an at-will contract. So it's really not a whole-scale change in the form of government. It's really adding an extra person. Now look, no system is perfect. Either system, an electoral system or resume screening, can lead to a great leader or it can lead to a bum. The question is really, which is the best way, which way improves your odds? Do you have an electoral system that it limits your choices to people living in Wausau with no particular qualifications? Or do you have a national search with resumes and people being screened on their education and their work experience? So just to review again, the business of providing city services grows more complex and more sophisticated every year. Cities get old and they struggle to compete with younger suburbs. In these times, you really need the best management, and we're more likely to get someone if we choose resume screening rather than an electoral system. I'd ask you to close with one question. Do you think the current system is the best we can do? Is this the top of the line? Is it the best we can do? I would submit to you that elections are great for holding people accountable for vision, for strategy, for policy, for reflecting the views of values of the community and the views of the community. On the contrary, I think having an election every 4 years is a really poor way to supervise a manager who's managing day-to-day operations. You simply can't wait 4 years for corrective action. And commingling politics and management is a bad idea. So if you can find it in your hearts and minds tonight to make the distinction between policy making and competent implementation of policy, we can have a good person in both positions, and we can have a system that holds both appropriately accountable for the respective contributions to good governance in Wausau.
Thanks very much. Linda Lawrence.
This one right here. Okay.
Thank you. Keene, you're so convincing, I think we should hire the whole city council. Just forget about elections. My God, that's where a lot of the dysfunction lies. But Keene and I met last fall, and having been a mayor, you know, I was real interested in what he had to say. I still like to stay on top of all the, you know, the juicy stuff that you read in the Daily Herald about what's going on at City Hall, and you know, you have to take some of that with a grain of salt. It's maybe a little bit more sensationalized than it's really happening.
Hey, whoa.
Trust me on that one.
Hey.
But I actually offered, I mean, Keene knows what he's talking about. I actually offered to write a letter of support into the Daily Herald for an administrator. And that was true until I saw the wording for the referendum. And if you want to start do I start it or do you start it? There we go. My little presentation is pretty visual, and it's just based on my experience, and it says, running City Hall, what Chapter 62 doesn't tell you. And it's one thing to articulate who's doing this particular function, who's appointing committees and who isn't. It's another thing to envision a half-time mayor and any words like vision, leadership. I just don't see those two things happening at all. So my premise is I am not against the city considering hiring an administrator. I probably would have loved having one. I could have maybe had some time for my family and time to read a juicy novel once in a while. But to have a half-time mayor would be a terrible mistake in the city of Wausau. So I'm going to try to switch slides. Okay, basically when you're mayor, you have to have what I call one eye on the horizon and one on the potholes. And I always like to think of young people, and Keene dwelled a lot on young people coming to our community, and it isn't even just what our current unemployment rate is or what our current infrastructure looks like, but what's it going to look like in 50 years? So you have to, there are a lot of functions that take place, not just meetings, but thinking, planning, pulling in people, pulling in resources. Really, as I cover later on, the mayor has to know what the future's going to look like. And my God, sometimes you have to spend a couple bucks to get out of town to listen to demographic speakers and futurists and other educators. And I know this community's really against travel and educating yourself. Other than looking at the future, the mayor spends a lot of time on what I call constituents and stakeholders. It's not just people coming in and consuming your time with good ideas, bad ideas, criticism, but come to this ribbon cutting, come to this ceremony. So not only the serious nitty-gritty planning and visioning and building the community, but also being in the community. So if you look at, just keep this benchmark of 20 hours a week or so in mind, it just cannot be done. You'll have an administrator in charge and a mayor coming in and saying, what's going on? And maybe getting the true story, sorry Mart, maybe getting a glossed over story. You don't know what the week is looking like. There are many, many boards, committees, and commissions that the mayor participates in, and if you don't go and hear what the people said, getting it from the minutes just isn't going to do it. You have to be there to know how an issue is forming, how a policy is forming, whether it's bartender licenses or whatever. You really do need to spread that thin because you're not going to get it from the minutes. There are also a lot of external committees and things in the county. A wise mayor would be part of the Wisconsin League of Municipalities. I'm sure Mayor Tipple is. There are other organizations where you network with other mayors and you find out what's going on. You copy every good idea you can. Public relations, that's pretty much listed there. There are legislators, there are business people that just want you to come in and meet someone that's coming in from their headquarters or something. Meeting the mayor is a pretty big deal. So here's another area where it's required that you're out in the public. Click, not click. Hello. Okay, here's where we have the potholes, and here's where I think an administrator would be great, because there's a lot of interaction with department heads and with other city employees from time to time on budget oversight. Your budget is really a policy on paper. It's a policy of how you value your parks and how you value your public transit and how you value services for the community. And if it's not in the budget, there's not really a whole lot you can do about it in the next year, but talk about it, or maybe get a foundation to pay for it. So the city starts developing the budget probably in May, maybe even talking about it before that. And it seems like you get a couple of weeks off for Christmas, and pretty soon you're addressing the next year's budget again. It is very time consuming. To me, an informed mayor needs to know, again, what's going on, and I would not want to come in and sit down with the administrator and say, well, tell me what's going on. That's not the way for a leader to get information. Budget oversight is important all year long in terms of where you are in your spending, what part of the year, your fiscal year you're in. When I was mayor, we had 10 or so really good department heads. and how an administrator would fit in with them. I like the idea of mentoring and leadership and staff development. That's something that that person would be a lot more skilled at doing than the mayor. But again, the mayor has to also have direct contact with the negotiations that are going on and really take a lot of the tone and information direction from the legislative body into the workplace. As I said earlier, the mayor needs time to stay current. And this isn't about just going on a junket and having a good time and drinking. It's about getting out there and networking with other people and finding out what trends there are in stormwater management, what legislation's coming down the pike. You have to do this. I don't know how you would do all of this again in 20 weeks, in 20 hours a week. I put together a sample calendar. This is nothing exaggerated. You might have a chamber AM breakfast at 7:30 in the morning, couple breaks to grab something to eat during the day, go to the dentist, and you're done maybe at 8, 9 o'clock at night. Very typical day. That's either a department head or an irate constituent, I'm not sure. Maybe that's the city administrator who had a bad day. You know, that's how a Tuesday might look. You have a staff meeting in the morning, all sorts of meetings, meet and greet people coming in, and then you've got to be in Madison the next day for some legislative work. So, you know, you don't get on the road till 8:30 at night. Again, not an atypical day. Couldn't be done in 20 hours a week. I love that picture. I don't know what it says, but that's kind of like Martin McBain's analogy to sausage making and governance, I think. It's complicated, it's dirty, but maybe sometimes you get a piece of sausage that's worth eating or a cup of coffee worth drinking. I thought that was a great picture. If you look at like Maslow's needs hierarchy, I always thought of the city kind of that way too. The future to me kind of ranks at the top. The Mayor's Youth Action Council was an example of something that we developed, and my God, Scott Resnick's running for mayor in Madison. I'm so excited. He was a product of that group to show young people what governance is like with hands-on projects, not just observing. Again, the whole public relations thing in the middle is really important. You can't withdraw and just be ribbon cutting with business and not be with kind of real people. The potholes, I mean, if you see where I put the areas, I think an administrator could fit between the public and the pothole area, not to demean it because it's on the bottom, but it's more the technical running of things, and I think it could be quite functional there. But again, don't take the mayor out of every level. Maybe the bottom level, there could be some leeway there, but in terms of the relationship to the public and building the future strategies, you know, that's important for the mayor. My recommendation on what would be next would be, you know, vote no on the referendum because it says part-time mayor, sorry. And then next spring, the city would do what's called a position needs analysis, which is what you do for an assistant fire chief or another position in the Parks Department. And you have to weigh that against other incoming requests and see if you're willing to pay for it. And if the mayor or whomever would come in requesting that, you know, God forbid the mayor, but you have to justify the money against what would be done. And I'm not saying we don't need one. I'm saying this is how it should be done rather than just voting for a part-time mayor. And then the budget process would kick in toward the end of next year, and there would be public hearings, et cetera. And it would either be included in the new table of organization or not. And this is how I envision a new table of organization if that were to pass. The governance remains intact, the authority remains intact. An administrator would function at the level, kind of certainly the electorate's at the top always, the mayor and council being the elected leaders of the community, and then the administrator really taking on some of those tasks that would free the mayor up for more visionary or complicated things. I couldn't help but put this in. Might be kind of a cheap shot, but it was in Sunday's Daily Herald, so it's got to be true. It was about the part-time mayor in Ferguson. Okay, you can read it yourself, but Ferguson has a part-time mayor who makes $4,200 a year. He's basically now deciding to open an office at City Hall. I thought that was kind of interesting. And he's arguing that Ferguson's city manager, okay, that's different, they get a veto and all that, but it's kind of the similar ilk. form of government made him more figurehead than administrator, leading the city council but lacking the power to do much else. City manager, that does take power away from the mayor. After the shooting, Knowles and Police Chief Tom Jackson became the public face of Ferguson, holding news conferences, public forums, etc. City manager, who made $120,000 a year until he resigned, remained out of sight. Okay, this might be a cheap shot, but the mayor was a figurehead. In other reading I've done about him, he wished that he had had more time to take care of some of these problems with race in the police force before it came to this tragic incident that happened. And I would certainly hate to see any leadership or vision or passion taken away from that level of governance in Wausau, merely because we feel we do need to add an administrator. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, well, we'll move to Ken Day.
Thank you. I perhaps I think for certain I have the least experience in city government as it relates to the current structure. However, I have a great deal of experience with administrators and boards of directors and currently on the county board and both private and profit boards and relationships with management. The first point, I have just 5 points I'd like to make. And the first point that I'd like to make is that this is not about the current incumbents in positions. This is not about past incumbents in the positions in the city of Wausau, whether they be elected or employed.
John and I are looking at you.
I know that. This has nothing to do with them as far as I am concerned. This has everything to do with the future of the city of Wausau. It's not about the people who have served tremendously in the past. We've had a tremendous amount of voluntary. If you look at the amount of time that council members put in, it is paid, kind of, so this is not about individuals who have served in the past. This is about the future and where the community of Wausau hopes to go as we look at the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I think Linda made the point probably as well or better than I can about municipal government is increasingly complex. 2 examples I would just use, and they're relatively straightforward examples. One is internally, the complexity of running a organization the size of the city of Wausau with the size budget it has. Employee compensation. Since Act 10, the public unions have a much lesser role in terms of how they are organized and their ability to negotiate and the involvement that the unions have as it relates to employees and their compensation. The development of a compensation system without a union is a tremendous challenge for an organization with 350, 360 employees with all the different job classifications. Someone needs to do that work and lead that and implement it in an effective way. If you're expecting, as was described by Linda, a mayor to do that kind of in-depth work and provide the leadership and the coordination for that, that's very challenging in this new world as compared to just 3 years ago. If you look at externally, if you think about external complexity of government, federal and state grants, TIF districts, if you will, are increasingly complex. They can now be used for a variety of things where initially TIF districts were for business development. They now can be used for residential development, a whole series of different applications. That complexity is much more sophisticated. As Linda aptly described, the role of a mayor, we have set them up to fail with these diverse responsibilities of internal operations and at the same time working as an external relation to the community, to the state, to the national government in terms of federal grants and whatever. So the increased complexity makes the success, the ability of one person in these very dual roles very challenging if possible. And at the same time, we're selecting from a pool of people who, if you may, volunteer to take this position. They volunteer to the electorate, and the electorate selects them. And as was pointed out earlier, the criteria is minimal. It's very minimal criteria to be to run for that position. My second point then would be an effective governance structure. At one point in time in Marathon County, there were 72 county board members. And I think prior to that, there might have even been more, but within 50 years, about 50 years ago, there were 72 county board members. We're now down to 38, and I think John Robinson in the past has encouraged the county to reduce that number, perhaps to half that many. The ability to represent people effectively with the communications that we have now and the greater uniformity of the population is much easier to do. And so when you're talking about effective governance structures, at the same time Marathon County had 72 county board members, the city of Wausau had a city council and a mayor. It has not changed its structure at all. It's exactly the same. It has not updated it to the current environment and the kind of functioning that is required in that structure. So I think effective governance is, with the current structure, is very difficult because of the diversity of responsibilities and the challenges that mayoral position faced. My next point would be elected versus appointed. There's a lot of concern that, well, if you have an employed administrator or city manager, whatever you would choose to describe them as, the electorate will lose all ability to influence decisions. In fact, it's quite to the opposite from my perspective. The electorate has the ability to elect its city council. That individual works for a city council and a mayor. That individual works for those elected officials. And that individual can be held responsible for effective operations. The council and the mayor can look at and determine expected outcomes for that position and for the city in advance, and then hold that person accountable for obtaining that outcome. They serve at the will of the council and can be employed or discharged both with or without cause based upon how the contract is written. And I've worked with a number of organizations where the individual in that senior position can be discharged with or without cause because, again, they serve at those elected officials' position or will, and they have no right to that position. They are employed as long as that council chooses them to. Much greater responsiveness to outcomes than where you elected a mayor where we would elect a mayor every 4 years. You can change leadership, and or I believe there's greater continuity because if a person is doing an excellent job, they don't have to run for re-election as it relates to the operations. You have greater continuity. Department heads and other employees in the organization will recognize that they have that person to be accountable to. The leadership for the direction of the city is set by the council, by determining outcomes, and by the mayor, and then they can hold that one person accountable. Right now, you will experience, I think, in our city government where employees they have many people who they feel that they are responsible to. They have many bosses, if you will, and if you have many bosses, you have no boss. Because no one can hold you accountable, and you can't hold yourself accountable because the expectations change from person to person. So having a management head running the operations with the elected officials who are setting the direction and establishing the policy is a much more effective structure for the future. Again, we're talking about the future of the city of Wausau. We're not talking about the past and the experiences that we've had in the past. Performance evaluation can be done very effectively on the employees as well as performance effectiveness for that individual who the council employs. And so with a budget of more than $60 million, we need a trained professional leadership running the city operation and then elected officials who have an ability to relate. There's some concern that the mayor wouldn't have the ability or they might lose the ability to relate to the community. In fact, with a concentration of responsibility in that area for the mayor, they could be full-time relating to the community, participating in meetings, as Linda described. Whether or not the 2 or 3/10 is sufficient in terms of mayor, one could question that, although I would suspect that if If the operation were being effectively managed right now, not much more than 2 to 3% or 20 to 30% of the mayor's job is in public relations right now. They've got to be spending, with that size staff and operation, they should be spending a majority of their time with the implementation of the city, which is administration. I think the operation as it's currently structured develops a conflict for the person. They have a very difficult time doing both of those jobs, and then at the same time, every 4 years, they have to run for re-election, and we elect them based upon their, excuse the term, John, political rhetoric, if you will, and not their skill, because we don't have any skill against which to judge their performance. I know, so I'm going to be up here by myself. So. But we don't have any predetermined outcomes or expectations. With a manager, you would very clearly have that, and that position could be very effectively evaluated. And then finally, I think that we all agree, maybe we don't agree, but I think you could see from the slides that were presented and just the feel in the community, I think the community of Wausau is quite stagnant right now, and it has not recovered from the most recent economic problems in this country. We're in a bit of a slump, if you will. We have some serious concerns confronting us. I think we have a mall that is in significant jeopardy. We are not generating the kind of businesses that manufacturing and other kinds of companies that require the services of organizations like Rooter Ware and Whipfly. And if you don't have a good business base, we're very apt to lose those support service organizations as well. It's not just the manufacturing that eventually goes away, but it's all of those support organizations as well. We need people who are elected, both as mayor and council people, focusing their time on working on the development of the future of Wausau, not deciding where stop signs go, not deciding the operational kinds of issues. Many of the committees that the council has now are very operational in nature. Some of that has to do by virtue of the people who are on the council, but also a great deal has to do with the way the council and our leadership is structured. We've set up a structure which does not allow or encourage our elected leaders to be futuristic in nature, to be looking at what needs to be done to make this community viable. So in summary, this is about the future, not about the past. We need a city structure of governance that can address the complexity of municipal government. We need a structure that sets incumbents up for success and clearly delineates roles and responsibilities and accountabilities so we can judge who is and who isn't effective. We need people proposing changes for the future so that there's an opportunity for this community to position itself much better for the future than what it currently is.
We'll go to John Robinson, and we want to make sure that there's time to hear people's questions. So we'll go to John Robinson and Dr. Hintz briefly, and we'll get to some questions.
Boy, they put the time limits on us. George Bernard Shaw said, "Democracy is a device that ensures us to be governed no better than we deserve."
That's for sure.
And think about that. In San Diego, where they've had a city manager since 1931, the Chamber of Commerce, the city club, CEOs from media are joining the mayor in blaming the manager-run system for the large budget deficit and the failure to fully fund the pension plan. They claim that recent managers have lacked the political strength to mandate the necessary changes. And by giving authority to the mayor and the council, the business community thinks that it will make a difference. In Dallas, where they have a manager, the downtown business leaders are urging a change in the current form of government because they point out that 15 city council members, merely all representing parochial neighborhood interest, and a mayor with little power other than a single council vote, has no responsibility for the interests of the downtown or the city as a whole. Over the past 10 years, communities such as Oakland, Cincinnati, which is one of the stars that Keene pointed out, Hartford, St. Petersburg, Richmond, Sioux Falls, and Spokane have gone from manager to mayor out of concerns over how that community should be led. So if it's such a great system, why all the doubt? I do have a personal bias. I believe in the public's inherent ability to choose for themselves the leaders of a community. And when you're looking at a CEO, whether it's a mayor or a manager, you want to have somebody that's involved and engaged in policy discussions. When you run for office, you're putting forth your vision for that community in the future. You're sharing that vision through the campaign and the electoral process. Where has the community been? You have that history. And I do want to differ also with Keene. One of the other requirements for a mayor is you have to be a resident of the city for 10 days prior to the election, but a resident nonetheless. There have been good mayors and there have been bad mayors. There are good administrators and there are bad administrators. We're fortunate tonight to have two very capable county administrators in the room, in Mort and Brad. And the county's been led for it, or led by them, and has valued from them. But I want to go to some of the issues that Keene raised, and he raised the doom and gloom about the standard metropolitan area. Where have the job losses occurred? Brokaw, shutting down of the mill outside the city of Wausau. S&E Crestline Weather Shield in Mosinee closed down because the Shields made a decision that the union was costing them too much money and that they could do the manufacturing of windows elsewhere. The Postal Service is looking at cutting back its regional distribution center in Rothschild. All of those impact the community as a whole, not just the city. Cities as a whole are growing older. They're limited because they can't annex and grow. The average residence living in a single dwelling is decreasing year after year, so the number of people in every home is less. So if you don't have growth through annexation, through other growth, you're going to shrink as a community. That is a trend experienced in every urban area across the country. So it's not just Wausau. It is a trend. And you need that vision and you need that leadership. One of the things that this proposal would call is to give the budget authority to the manager or administrator. The budget is the #1 policy document enacted each year by any governing unit. It allocates scarce resources and creates new programs. I would hope that you'd want an elected official who has to go to the public and ask for their stamp of approval and to be selected to make that decision. You're looking for leadership, that vision. You're looking for leadership and the ability to deal with legislators. Having also been a legislator and a city council member and a county board member, I sometimes have an identity crisis. But I think there are times where having an elected official go and make that contact is critical to developing an understanding and a relationship with those. We trust the governor of this state to put together his management team. We trust the president of this country to put together his management team. We ought to trust the mayor to be able to put together their management team and to deal with those issues. No one person is going to do it, but rather it's going to be the finance director, the city attorney, the director of public works, the human resources director, and the team. Not one person will do that, but rather the mayor and that team. It is about relationships with other units of government, and relationships are better when you come from a community, you're part of that community, and you have a vested interest in the future of that community. You want somebody that's been a spokesperson for the community. And when you have a weak mayor and an appointed official, and they both have views, which one wins? Probably neither. There has to be accountability. I have an inherent trust in the citizens to make the decision. With the manager system, administrator system, they are appointed by and serve at the wishes of the city council. 12 individuals. In Carson City, they went through 3 managers in 20 months. In Karen Folks, the manager was removed in Allen Park, Michigan, given a severance package of $47,000 in 6 months' salary, plus $7,000, plus $17,000 in retirement. In San Jose, 3 former managers were fired and were paid $333,000 to go away. In Chowchilla, California, the administrator was dismissed with 9 months' salary. Remember Charlie Balsam? He was here before you were, Mort. The county paid him to go away. So there is a cost associated with failed leadership on the part of those appointed officials. And there's a lack of succession and a disruption when they go away. In my experience in dealing with the Department of Natural Resources, I travel in northern Wisconsin, you see managers move and move and move, looking for better opportunities, or they've run into conflicts with the council, but they move. We've been fortunate in this area with Brad and Mort, but that's the exception, not the rule. So as we look to the referendum, the question is who do we want leading the city? Do you want somebody that's accountable to the public, who is from the community, who understands the community, who shares a vision with the community and is chosen by that vision? Or do you want somebody that is appointed?
Thanks. And we'll go to Dr. Hintz.
Thank you. It's not my role to advocate for or against your choices in the referendum. How about that? Now you'll ask me to talk more softly, right? Yeah. As I was saying, it's not my job to recommend for or against in the referendum, but to look at the actual things that would change and what the consequences of the change would be. Also, being the last person on the panel, I get an opportunity to comment on all of my fellow panelists here, which I fully intend to do. The first thing I would say is I've heard really good arguments on both sides tonight. I think that you had good presentations. Back in January, we had a series of listening sessions where the public was invited to speak, and several people on the panel did speak for and against the proposed referendum. But one of the things that I observed at that time is that the people who supported the referendum and the establishment of a city administrator position all focused on the need, on the idea of the city as a very complex organization with over 300 employees, a very large budget, a very complex organization, and that we needed somebody who would be able to manage that complex organization. The people who spoke in favor of maintaining the current system with a full-time mayor emphasized the importance of representative government, that they felt that yes, it was an organization, but that cities were different from businesses and other large organizations, and that the link between the public, the voters, and the people they chose was a very important one. And I think that you've seen that this evening in terms of some of the values that the speakers have started out with and have advocated. My perspective, I suppose, says that cities are really both. I think the first thing to recognize in the referendum is that many of the that this is not a change in the form of government. You remain under Chapter 62. You will elect a mayor. That mayor will have lots of responsibilities, presiding over the council, casting ties, vetoing, representing the city in many different forums. And I expect that many in the public would not notice a great deal of difference in what the mayor is actually doing there. The fundamental issue, which I think has been fairly well brought out here, is over that portion of the mayor's responsibilities that currently are devoted to the administrative activities of the city, supervising the department heads, seeing that the administration and operations of the city are properly carried out. Okay, now here's my chance to take a few pokes at my fellow panelist. I think Mr. Winter has described certainly a series of challenges that Wausau faces, and indeed, as has been pointed out, these are challenges that a lot of cities are facing right now. I think the question that you would want to ask him is, does city government have full responsibility for solving all of these challenges? And can we say with certainty that bringing this extra person on would lead to these challenges going away? They're big challenges, and quite honestly, I'm not sure that all of them can be put on the back of the city there. With regard to Ms. Lawrence, I would make a couple of comments. Yeah, there certainly are times when the representational aspects of the mayor are pretty heavy. You're right about those early morning breakfasts and other kinds of things would happen. But the one thing you would need to note is that the referendum, although it talks about a part-time mayor, probably is only going to have one defining consequence if it passes, and that is in the city charter ordinance, there's a provision that says that the mayor has to be full-time and cannot hold an outside job. If the referendum passes and the city council accepts it, probably the first thing that would need to be repealed is that provision that says you can't hold an outside job and you're not going to be held to full-time. But the amount of time that the person spends is simply not defined, and the idea of 20 hours is simply a number. I've seen part-time mayors who work 50 hours a week, probably drive their department heads crazy, but there really isn't anything either in the state statutes or the city ordinances that defines what part-time is. It can be as little as the public would allow before you would vote somebody out of office, or it can be as many hours as the person wishes to devote to it. My other comment there is I have been a part-time mayor in the city of Oshkosh. I was a really part-time mayor in the sense that I got paid $3,000 a year. I presided over the council. I actually voted as one member of the council. We're a city manager form of government. But I had all of the representational responsibilities. I went to a lot of morning breakfasts, a lot of ribbon cuttings. I served on some intergovernmental bodies. I did some back channel negotiating with Wisconsin Public Service over acquisition of land. Maybe my schedule was pretty flexible at the time that I was there, and I may have had more time that I could devote to it, but was it an overwhelming representational task? I don't think it was. I think I would say that some of the burden of representation that was described probably comes because somebody is a full-time mayor, and that if this change were made, that I think that it would be a representational task that somebody could do and would be willing to do without being absolutely overwhelmed. Now, the way in which you determine what the expectations are primarily are what you set the salary at. And if the city council, if this passed, wanted to have really high expectations about the amount of time that the person was going to spend in office, they set the salary up a bit. If they had lower expectations, they would go in with a lower salary there, and it would get worked out. Mr. Robinson, again, I thought you represented the concept of democracy and the link between the public and the elected officials very well. The one thing that I would raise a red flag on is that I think you were really trading the position of mayor and with the position of administrator. And you were talking about leadership moving from the mayor to the administrator. And I don't think that's an accurate position of what the administrator does. Yeah, the administrator, we would hope, comes with a lot of ideas and can present them to the council, can work with the department heads in developing them. But I can assure you that administrators who want to hold their job for any period of time can make a recommendation to the council, and if the council decides that's not what they want to do, it's very wise for the administrator not to make that recommendation again. Because it's very easy to be terminated without cause. So I don't think that there is if the system is working properly, and again, I would accept that there are times when councils have really abrogated their responsibilities and the administrator is the one who really is driving the wagon there. But if there is an appropriate balance between your city council in terms of setting policy and holding the administrator responsible, then the administrator, is not the leader in the same way that the full-time mayor is the leader. The other thing, just a quickie, with regard to the budget, it doesn't become the manager's budget in the sense that this is what the city's budget is going to be. Yes, the manager, basically the process would be the council provides some guidance to the manager or to the administrator and the department heads. The administrator works with the department heads and a budget comes forth. Then it's up to the council where it goes from there. As it is now, it would go to the finance committee. Finance committee could do whatever it wants with it. Then it would go to the full council. The council can do whatever it wants with it. If the council decided, if the referendum passed, that they wanted the budget to go from the administrator to the part-time mayor, and then from the mayor to the finance committee, and the finance committee to the council, that might be the process. That's entirely something that the council will have to decide if the referendum passes. Finally, I do think that a fundamental issue is simply which approach provides the greatest probability of having someone who understands how to administer and manage a complex organization. Note that I didn't say someone who is trained as a city administrator. I think there are people in Wausau who understand how to run complex organizations. The issue is, what's the best way to get them to run? And is the election the best selection process there?
All right, thank you, Dr. Hintz. Thank you, all the panelists. Really good.
Yeah.
Who's got questions? We've got microphones. Raise your hand. We'll take some time for a question and answer. All right. Here it comes.
This is to Mr. Hintz. please explain the difference between administrator and manager? Mr. Robinson kept using the term manager, and the way I understand it, the manager is entirely a different animal than an administrator.
In Wisconsin, there are several estates. Chapter 64 specifies the option for cities to establish and hire a city manager. In Chapter 62, you have a mayor-council form, and what we have seen in Wisconsin is that cities operating under Chapter 62 have, by local ordinance, usually a charter ordinance, established the position of city administrator. So there is simply a legal difference. Now, normally, council manager form in Wisconsin gives more authority to the manager. And in some cities, not all cities, there is no mayor. The chief appointed person is the president of the council. In other cities, such as Oshkosh, we have a directly elected mayor, but that's a local option there. So it's a difference in the legal basis of the position, and in general, the manager has the authority to appoint and terminate department heads. Administrators can appoint and terminate, but subject to approval by the city council. Now, the second part of that question is, what about the actual people? The reality is that somebody trained as a city manager is exactly as a person trained as a city administrator. They've gotten a degree, a master's degree in public administration or business administration. They've started out as an assistant somewhere, worked in a small community, have moved into larger communities. And in one town, one city, they'll work as an administrator. In another one, they'll work as a manager. But they're essentially doing the same kinds of things.
Great. I saw another question in the front. John?
First observation, I'm John Inc. I live in Wausau. First observation is when you talked about the unemployment, it dropped by just under 3% in the surrounding area and by over 4% here in the city of Wausau. So that's not all that bad. So we have made some progress on jobs. My question really comes down is, why is it an either or? Linda put the idea of having a city manager. Do we not have people on the staff in City Hall that have these management skills? You know, the administrative skills, and are they not working there? And if we don't, why don't we hire an administrator to work with both council and the city? And that might clean up some of the communications.
Great. We'll have Keene and then Linda respond to this.
Okay. It really isn't an either-or choice. So one of the things we're going to be doing is we're going to, and this is a source of disagreement between Linda and I, and as chairman of the finance committee and as a financial planner, I know I'm going to take 80% of the mayor's current duties away from them and shift those to an administrator. And I'm certainly not then going to pay that mayor full-time salary and let them spend their entire days as a socialite. That would be foolish. So we're going to add about a quarter FTE to the mix. But John, we're going to, basically, we have the people to do the talent. We're going to add about a quarter FTE to the mix, and the mayor is going to be restricted to part-time and told to focus on policy and on vision and keep their nose out of the day-to-day operations of the city. And so we really aren't expanding the number of people very much at all, just a quarter FTE.
With what you just said, you're more wrong than I ever thought you were, Keene. A socialite. You have no idea what a full-time mayor does. No idea. But back to your question, yes, the department heads, most of them have master's degrees. They're very experienced before they're even hired at Wausau because the salaries, you know, I think were pretty healthy competitively. I have the sense that Mayor Tipple, one of his strengths isn't kind of managing department heads. I mean, I've seen quotes in the paper like, oh, there was cat fights and stuff like that between women. You know, you do have to handle that. You have to do the unpleasant job of handing out maybe less than perfect performance reviews, do some performance planning. You know, I'm not there anymore, so I'm not sure what's going on. But I have the feeling that some of that dysfunction, you know, the way it has appeared is what's led to this. Also, you have council members who are micromanaging, you know, where there are council members who are going directly to employees and asking for studies to be done and this and that isn't how it should be done. And the mayor really should be taking that by the horns and saying, no, this is going to stop. And I guess he's done that recently. But so it isn't a system that needs to be changed, you know, it maybe needs to be strengthened. And that's why I think an administrator working for the mayor and the council, but working on a daily basis at the direction of the mayor would be, you know, would be just fine. There's the mayor's duties then in terms of that top of the pyramid, planning for the future, intergovernmental work, spending much more time with Brad Carger and other leaders in the county, spending much more time in Madison with legislators to talk about, you know, the future. It's not that you're going to take 80 or 90% of the time away from a mayor. You would free up the mayor's time to do things that a good mayor doesn't have time to do now.
Is this working? Perfect. My name is Matt Haneke. I am a resident here in the city of Wausau, and I have a little bit of training in studies that I've done in political science as well as human geography and even the basic courses that I've taken. Right now, I'm just speaking to both sides, talking about one particular. We kind of have a doom and gloom diagnosis as of right now that are primarily economic problems. And, you know, if human geography has taught me anything, it's that the source of community growth and the source of a country's growth in general is always tied to its, I guess, its economic usefulness, which means that it has to have a purpose, it has to have a calling, it has to have something that people say, I know that place because they provide this, I know that place because they do this. And, you know, for the longest time, Wausau has been a great community that's been, you know, run by mayors, never by an administrator. And the only issue that we're facing now is, you know, I think a lot of people were thrown off by the declining paper business. That was a huge benefactor to the Wausau community. And I think, you know, really, I hate to be really blunt here, but I think you could sit 10 qualified high schoolers in a room, tell them the problems that this community is facing, have them have a problem-solving session for 8 hours in a day, and you'd be amazed by the results that you would get. Because I think right now, to sit back and say that we need to find someone who's going to be making almost twice the salary of a mayor, just to find a few solutions to the economic problems that we face is just ridiculous. Right now, I think... I'm sorry, but when it comes down to it, I really feel that it would just take the council and the mayor to sit down and really say, all right, Wausau paper or the certain things that made Wausau great, that put it in its prime, are declining or aren't going to be, you know, the thing to push us into the future. So what is that next thing? And the truth of the matter is, I feel like one of the number one things that you see popping up all over Wausau is new places of businesses that provide services, you know, in the culinary department. And not that that's a bad thing. I feel that's not a very I don't feel sometimes that that's a very strong economic stronghold to push the community forward. It's great for small business owners, but in terms of you know, helping the economy, taxpayers are paying the same amount in taxes, and now they just have more options where to spend their money instead of saving it and using it.
So let's get a response. If I understand, one of your points here is, you know, there are broader economic forces than what happens inside City Hall. This is something that that Dr. Hintz spoke to. Would anyone like to respond to this? Sure, Ken Day.
I think people like simple answers. And this is the situation the city of Wausau is in, and many other cities, as was indicated, faces are much more complex than just economics. We are an absentee-owned community right now. You start looking at our major employers, we don't have the ownership here in this community. That has changed over the last 20 years. That's a significant issue for us. You look at our major corporations, they're not locally owned. Senior management doesn't live here. Decisions aren't made here about contributing to the community. So it's more than just economics. It's a whole change in the environment in which this city and many others that haven't and aren't developing ownership locally are facing. There are a lot of other issues besides just economics. If you think about the future, start thinking about elderly housing. What's it called? The silver tsunami. I think I'm a part of that.
That's my term.
That's your term? I saw John's term. Well, that's going to be a major challenge for the community of Wausau. We don't have transportation sufficient to deal with that kind of situation. We don't have the kinds of services in close proximity to people who are going to need different kind of housing than they have. If you look at the development of that kind of housing now, it's out and about on the outside of Wausau, and there's no transportation. And so, well, you see the growth of housing that is definitely not up to the standard that you want for the individuals who are living in the city, and that's what's driving people out. Nothing more, and that's an economic issue because the individuals who are living do not have the money to pay for the housing that optimally everybody would want. Well, elderly housing is different than affordability. Elderly housing is the ability to care for your property, the ability to take care of your facilities, to manage your home, especially if you're unable to go up and down steps and all of these kinds of things. So there's economics for people who are not able to improve their homes and can manage them, but there's this future bodes very differently for us in terms of the elderly. There's also the whole aspect of social problems that are coming into a community this size. And I will identify the use of drugs. And that is not, you can say that's an economic situation because people, have no jobs, so they turn to drugs. We have a significant issue with mental health in this community and a number of individuals who need mental health services that are not currently available. So it's more than economics. It's a very complex, and it isn't just a simple answer like if we had jobs, everything would be taken care of. If those jobs are all employed by an absentee owner, you only have them during the period of time that absentee owner wants you to have them. Just think about our major industries here, our major companies, and they're not owned locally any longer. At one time they were. And we're on the point of losing more of those. If you think about others, there are many of them in great jeopardy of being purchased outside this country.
Let me just make a quick point to your comment. You're talking about policy, and of course policy is very important. But the referendum really isn't about policy. The policy is the what, what should be doing. The referendum is dealing with the how. That is, once the policy is decided, how is that policy going to be implemented if it falls within the scope of the city? And that's a really important distinction to make.
My first week as mayor, Bob Miniman, who was on the city council, brought me a little placard that said, "Tradition shouldn't be the enemy of innovation." And it's a plaque that I kept in my office. And the jobs of the past are not the jobs of the future. And what we need to understand is that what we need to understand is what we have. What do we have? We have natural resources. You're not going to build another Rib Mountain. You're not going to have the Wisconsin River or the Eau Plaine or Eau Claire rivers be created elsewhere. So you've got some natural resources that you can tie into. We know that metal fabrication is a strength of the area and opportunities for growth. We know that healthcare or a center, but you need to look at what you've got and look at how you protect and expand those areas into the future, because you're right, the restaurants are supported by the others in the economy with discretionary income, and they're not necessarily a growth component to the community because there's only so much capacity. So you need to look ahead, and you need to have that vision and the policies in place. And hopefully your mayor and your elected officials will work together and communicate together and work on that.
I'm Paul Henning, lifelong resident of Wausau, Wisconsin, and I'd like to speak to something, trying to decide how to turn this from a political statement to a question. I think I've got it. John mentioned trusting the citizens to make the right decision, and I agree with that, and that's noble, but a bit ideal, and I'm wondering, is there an important component to this conversation, and that's the mayoral candidate pool. Are we underemphasizing that there's an extreme difference between a quality pool of mayoral candidates that Wausau has and a pool of quality and willing candidates? And it's been all too often an experience that that universe of willing pool candidates drops drastically in this community and is actually a very, very small number. So small that it is often turning into a least damage or best of the worst type of campaign. And that hurts that, that mayoral model discussion, because all too often it can be a long extended period, more than 4 years, more than 8 years, into the double digits of a non-qualified candidate doing the job that the whole council's frustrated isn't getting the job done. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a good question that we see in local elections. Many local elections are not contested. That's common. And in recent memory, the mayoral elections have come from a city council challenger. Linda, do you want to respond to this question?
Right, I just wanted to point out that years ago, the Wausau Chamber developed a really good program called Leadership Wausau. And one of their main goals at that time was to encourage, people to run for office, and people who, had a lot of skills and background and education and blah, 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 who were kind of the upcoming people in the community. I don't have any numbers, but I think it's been an abysmal failure in terms of that outcome. It's had a lot of great other outcomes. But I don't think many people have come out of that running for office. And I don't know, John, you can speak for yourself. There's a few of us here who've run for office, but I think one answer would be, why would I put myself through that? Because you are under constant scrutiny and criticism, sorry, Bob, by the media, for number one. You have, if you're a mayor or a city council member, whatever, I think let's talk about mayor, you have people who are just kind of out to get you. They're just out to see you fail. And so people don't want that kind of, crap and stress in their lives. Exactly. And I think, you can
So you tend to agree with Paul Henning's
I do.
position?
I do. And the city, in the chamber tried to correct that, and it hasn't happened.
Okay. Keene Winters.
Yeah, I think talking about recruitment pool is really a central idea here. So if I was looking for the ideal administrator, the ideal person to supervise, mentor, and coach my department heads, who are all high in their fields, there are 595 villages and cities in Wisconsin. Wausau is the 17th largest. If you're a department head in Wausau, you're arguably in the top 3% of your profession. So we're talking about top professionals, and my ideal candidate would be somebody who has a master's degree in public administration and at least 15 years experience running cities in other cities. Now, if I said I recruited statewide for those credentials, I don't know, Dr. Hintz, what did I get? 12, 15 applicants that met those credentials?
You would. Wausau would be an attractive city by size and other characteristics.
But if I said those same qualifications out and I said, there's one more qualification. you have to be a resident of Wausau. The answer is I might get goose egg. Nobody who meets those qualifications. I mean, imagine if you were recruiting for the CEO of Aspirus Hospital, and you said, we want all these qualifications except we want you to also live in the city of Wausau. How many people would you get? I mean, it drastically limits your recruitment pool to people who generally don't have the qualifications. And that's why we really need to do a national search, a resume screening, have minimum qualification standards, and bring in a good person, because we are a big city and we deserve a solid person to run the city.
All right, we're going to go to a question in the back.
John Hermanson, I guess I'm a reverse demographic from what Mr. Winters described, because my wife and I came here 35 years ago, and this SMSA is 1/3 the size of every other SMSA either one of us ever lived in, but we stayed here for 35 years. So there's something to be said, but my question is a little bit different. I've taught political science for about 20-some years, focusing on local government, and there's never been a study that I've seen, maybe you all can remind me, that suggests that a manager form of government provides leadership particularly. And yet all the problems that were identified, whether they're categorized as economic or political, all require leadership to bring the stakeholders that Mr. Day and Mr. Robinson were talking about together to understand a community. So what studies or statistics have you found, Mr. Winters, that suggest that a manager will do anything to address the problems you identified us as having? Administrators don't do those things by themselves. They require a leader to help identify, coalesce the problems, and develop, as Dr. Hintz said, policy solutions. Managers implement policies.
That's right, and what Dr. Hintz has emphasized really is dividing implementation from that brainstorming and policy making. And when you get those two mixed, then you question whether implementation is driving policy or policy is driving implementation. So if the idea is we need to get more work out of some particular area, and really the focus is on that area not wanting to do that, then you get implementation driving policy. So you want to break those two apart. But very clearly the trend is, and I would cite these numbers, and Dr. Hintz might be able to give you some studies. In 1976, there were 12 administrators in Wisconsin. In 1990, there were 53 cities had them, and by 2012, 97 cities had them. At the same time, the cities that had mayors was 125 20 years ago. That's dropped to 83. So more and more cities in net are finding that bringing an administrator to focus on implementation and keeping the policymakers in their role is the best way to address these problems.
If I may, published in the American Political Science Review, this last issue is actually finished in March 2014. It's a comprehensive study of all cities in the United States entitled Representation in Municipal Government. Made no difference. The difference in policy making came entirely from leadership, however organized. So there's no evidence whatsoever that I can see. I'm asking for your study that shows that a city manager makes better policy.
Okay, it's an interesting question. John Robinson, you had a response?
And I was going to, thank you, Don. I couldn't have planted a question better, but didn't. But thank you for raising it. You know, the issue of the future of a city and where we're going directionally is really a policy issue. And the question again is who is best in a best position to set those policies? Somebody that is elected, and Paul, trying to get back to your comment, is when I ran, there were 5 candidates for mayor, and there was a good selection process with the treasurer and businessmen and others, and there were choices, and there have been choices through the years, and I think one of the concerns is that people don't like to open up themselves to the scrutiny and the coverage in the paper. But getting back to the issue of policy, I think you are much better able to articulate policy when you understand the community, that you're part of that community, and you have a base of support in that community through the electorate selecting you. You don't have that choice when the 11 members of the city council select you. You're at their beck, and so much of what we do is policy in nature, and where we're going in the future relative to housing stock, relative to infrastructure, all have policy ramifications. Touch hands.
I certainly agree with Mr. Robinson about policy, but I think that he's missing the point. There's absolutely nothing in the change that says that the people responsible for policy are going to be any different. There still is a directly elected mayor, and we have a council. And if anything, and again, I'm not advocating this position, I'm simply talking about implications. One of the things that I think people would note today is that the Wausau Council is far too involved in administrative issues, and as a consequence, it doesn't have much time to think about policy. And to some extent, the current situation is actually detrimental to good time spent on policy. And one of the things that we would, I think, recommend is that councils be able to devote their time to policy and spend less time on administrative matters. One of the things that we would expect from an administrator is not that there be a recommendation, but that there be advice given when asked about the implications of various policies. The administrator, under the direction of the council, serves as a person who provides ideas and discusses what the implications are of various policies. Once the policy is set, then it's the job of the administrator simply to see that it's efficiently and effectively implemented.
All right. I'm afraid we're at the end of our time. We're at 7:30. Thanks everyone for coming here. Thanks to our panelists.
Yours correctly.
We really appreciate your attendance here. Let us know what you thought
No,
and vote on April 7th.